Bonjour. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Curry. I'm the manager of the Urban Systems Unit at LoCS4Africa. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to our session entitled Getting Down to Business, Enabling Private Sector Leadership in the Circular Economy. The session is part of the Local Climate Solutions for Africa Virtual Congress, now in its 5th iteration, with the main theme, Financing for Change, which is expressed along 4 different streams. Currently, we're in the Nexus and Circularity stream. And of course, we'll explore the cross-cutting themes of post-COVID-19 recovery, gender equity, and multi-level governance. A few highlights from the LoCS sessions yesterday, focusing on disaster risk reduction, key challenges articulated by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction are risk knowledge and risk governance. Hearing from the CEO of African Risk Capacity, we heard that insurance itself is not the ultimate solution, but it can work well as one of the instruments for governments and communities to use. Turning to our mobility session, we had inputs from the Division Manager for Transport in the Ministry of Infrastructure of Rwanda. Rwanda's introducing electric mobility and non-traditional modes of transport. The city of Kigali has developed a master plan focusing on mixed use and non-motorized transport, which creates a resilient transport system. And finally, hearing from the Africa Program Director of the Institute for Transport and Development Policy, there is a need for more equitable mobility guided by good design standards and political will to stir mobility investments. So our session today is brought to you by the Urban LEDS project and convened by the African Circular Economy Network, as well as LoCS4Africa. LoCS4Africa, as I hope you know, is a membership organization of over 125 local governments across the continent committed to building sustainable cities. The key question for this session that we will explore is, how do we support good business environments for circular economy innovation? To delve into the Urban LEDS program, it's now in its 2nd phase since 2017, but has been going since 2012, funded by the European Commission, with UN Habitat and ICLEI as the implementing partners, implementing in 65 cities across South Africa, Rwanda, Bangladesh, Colombia, Laos, Indonesia, Brazil, India, and Europe. And the main focus areas are mainstreaming low emission development, energy, transport, and waste, improving capacity to access climate finance, and improving and enhancing multi-level governance. We are delighted to be convening this session with the African Circular Economy Network, a strong partner in our circular development pathway. And I would just like to invite one of the executive committee, Peter, to share a bit about African Circular Economy Network. Peter.
Thank you very much, Paul. My name's Peter Desmond. I'm co-founder of the African Circular Economy Network. ACEN is a network of roughly 100 circular economy professionals in 30 countries across Africa. And our primary focus is working on the ground with private sector policymakers and financial institutions in the transition to a circular economy in Africa. We feel that collaboration is a key element across the value chain between stakeholders in order to achieve this. And so we're delighted to co-host this session with LoCS4Africa. And we look forward to further collaboration, Paul, on the 25th of November, when we will be running a session on circular economy in African cities. So I'm looking forward to this session. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Peter. I believe that the link to join the further conversation on the 25th of November at 12 on realizing opportunities for the circular economy in Africa will be posted into the question and answer section. Forgive me, I forgot to begin the webinar by saying that you can please introduce yourself in the question box, share any questions with us as we proceed throughout our discussion today, and see links and biographies that will be pasted into that from our speakers. So to dive into our session now, we are blessed to be joined by some wonderful speakers who will help contextualize circular economy from a finance perspective and a business perspective. We'll start with Gracia Munganga, who's the manager of the Carbon Trust Southern Africa, who'll provide an overview of who's providing leadership in circular economy across the continent. We'll then hear from Davina Milenge Uwela, who's the Principal Program Coordinator for Climate Change and Green Growth Department at the African Development Bank. We'll hear from Jonas Bistrom, who's the Lead Engineer in Urban Development Division in the Projects Directorate of the European Investment Bank. We'll turn to Ruka Sanusi, the Executive Director of the Ghana Climate Innovation Center. We'll hear from Himka Singh, the CEO of the Compost Kitchen. And finally, we'll hear from Honorable Mayor Ndudzi Gift Muhlongo from the city of Umhlatuze, who will offer some reflections on how local government can support the many interventions shared by our speakers beforehand. We're going to aim for a conversational approach with short interventions and invite our attendees to please share their reflections in the chat, and for our panelists to reflect on what's being shared. So I'm going to stop sharing screen now, and I invite our panelists to please share your videos, and we can begin our conversation. So I'd like to turn to Gracia to give us a bit of a scene setting on the circular economy and how it is perceived and progressing across the continent.
Thanks, Paul. I don't know if everyone can hear me clearly.
We can hear you well.
Perfect. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone, well, Peter and ICLEI for inviting me, and I would also like to acknowledge the panelists that are here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Maybe I thought I'd start with a bit of a introduction. I'm wearing two hats today. So I do work for the Carbon Trust Southern Africa office. The Carbon Trust, we typically work with a range of partners across public, private, with the donor institutions. And our ethos is essentially accelerating a move to a low carbon development world. And we do that across a number of sectors: energy access, resource efficiency, green finance, etc. And my other hat is that I'm a member of ASEN, and that's probably why I'm sitting here as well. And just to reiterate what Peter has said, ASEN has done a number of studies, and our role really is to showcase the work that's currently being done in the circular economy on the continent. And how we do that is by linking with leaders in various countries across the continent and being able to collate that information. And so maybe I'd like to twist the question, because your question was around the fact that who is leading in the circular economy in Africa. And just to twist it is, where do we see the most amount of activities? So my experience with that has been that depending on where you find yourself on the continent, there's obviously regional initiatives. There's a couple of common themes or common sectors that keep coming back. And one of them, probably the one where we've seen the most amount of activities, is around waste recovery and recycling, and a lot of the high value materials, particularly in that category. So plastics, electronic waste, resource or nutrient recovery around organic waste, and the value that you could get for organic waste. That's where we've seen a lot of the project. So if you go on the ASEN website, we've got Peter has updated, is now 30, it's not 29 anymore, but we've been able to collect a list of activities and projects that are primarily, if I'm not mistaken, private sector driven across, at the very least, 29 countries. And when we drill down at country level, I decided to use examples from the 3 different regions, just because sometimes South Africa tends to dominate the discussion, but there is equal amount of really good work being done across the region. So in the South African context, for example, there's a number of initiatives that are being driven both by the private sector and the public sector. The private sector example, very good project that's probably been spoken about a number of times, is around the industrial symbiosis program that's being run both by the Western Cape and Gauteng, that has delivered tremendous economic values for the SMMEs that have been part of the project. I think their tagline is, "Your waste is our value." And through encouraging exchange between small companies, they've been able to achieve a number of KPIs, such as resource reduction in terms of water, energy efficiency, number of jobs created through economic opportunities, amount of tons of waste that have been avoided from being disposed in landfills, which would have usually been the case, and CO2 obviously avoided as well, so emissions avoided. In South Africa, again, there's from a nutrient recovery perspective, we're looking at agri-protein that is basically leading recovery of valuable nutrient for production of animal feed waste, so protein. And there's a number of additional private sector driven initiatives. I think the other example is Barlow World running a workshop that refurbishes their used equipment and resells that, very much aligned with what the circular economy stands for. In East Africa, we've been involved in a project that's primarily at research level. It's called GECO, and it's working in the Raraka area, where Prof. Maj is working with a number of companies to essentially create an eco-industrial park based very much on industrial symbiosis. And they're primarily looking at actually water in the Kenyan context, because that area is particularly water stressed. In West Africa, Ghana and Nigeria are leading a number of projects, particularly private sector driven, around particularly resource of recovery of waste. And we're looking at high value materials, so plastics, electronic waste, etc., etc. So that's the sectors, if I was to summarize, the sectors where we've seen a lot of activities around circular economy, leading, let me say, embedding circular economy principles on the continent, would be around integrated waste management, or the waste economy, around the agricultural sector, and that's primarily based on the fact that we recognize a lot of the waste in the agricultural value chain should actually not be waste. It's valuable product that can be repurposed and reused, either as a byproduct or as an input into a different material. And then we're seeing increasingly a lot of activities around manufacturing, remanufacturing, offering a product as a service, so business model innovations. But that's very much happening at a company level on a case-by-case basis. At a program level, just on the continent, I think that I would not do justice to the circular economy discussion if I was not to mention the fact that Sweet Africa Green has been doing a lot of work across a number of countries, South Africa, Kenya, if I'm not mistaken, Burkina Faso, Mauritius, working with SMMEs, primarily, as I understand it, around agriculture, the manufacturing sector, etc., etc. And then the African Development Bank, ASEA, so the African Circular Economy Alliance, whose secretariat is hosted by Dalberg. So I'll leave it at that. I hope that that gives a bit of a list of what kind of activities are happening currently when it comes to the circular economy in Africa. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Gracia. We'd like to hear some initial inputs now from Davina of the AFDB. Particularly to reflect on what the role of a development finance institution is in driving a circular transition from your perspective.
Well, thank you, panelists, thank you, moderator, and I'm very happy to join this session.
It's a bit soft on our side. I wonder if you can come a bit close to the microphone.
Let me try. Hello, can you hear me well? No?
That's a bit better.
Okay. So yes, I was saying thank you all for this wonderful session. I'm really honored to be part of this team of experts on an area that we're very keen as the African Development Bank to engage in as a driver of social inclusion and indeed sustainable development, because it has a whole lot of good benefits in terms of resource use efficiency and living within our planetary boundaries. So in terms of financing circular economy, let me speak largely from what Glacia left us in terms of the large tapestry of innovation, it is really encouraging to see the kind of work that is going on the continent in terms of business opportunities, making the case for circular economy, because as a bank, that's what we would want to hear, where the growth opportunities are. And so I was very encouraged, and I think this is one conversation we'll take forward in trying to tap into all those many innovations that are there. As the African Development Bank, we've now started or are in the process of setting up what we call the Africa Circular Economy Facility that will indeed feed into all the work that Lasha has pointed out in terms of the different activities that will trigger impact. Our interest would see innovations that trigger impact, innovations that crowd in youth employment, and of course women employment. We have in the past come up with different facilities that support youth. We have a youth entrepreneurship facility that was launched years ago. We have a women entrepreneurs facility that is also live, and agri-entrepreneurs facilities as financing mechanisms. Now, the challenge has always been, and when we speak of these, we speak in hundreds of millions. But the issue has always been that they don't normally trigger to these impact drivers, which is what we're talking about here. And the reason has always been that those innovations kind of don't meet the threshold of where the bank finances. And that's a big challenge, given that we try to develop, to drive impact. And so what we're trying to do now with the President's second mandate, he's just been sworn in 2 months ago, his new mandate, 5-year mandate, is to reach to that base of the pyramid in terms of driving action. And so we're looking at SME financing very critically. And through the facility, it's an initial facility as a test of concept to understand the business model of such programs. And ideally, what we would have in that facility is to have an incubation hub and a deal marketplace for this kind of innovations, to understand the business concept and crowd in financiers like ourselves and other impact investors and institutional investors. We have part of our donors, the Nordic Development Fund, which has been instrumental in financing some innovations in this area. So we're trying to use the facility to engage on how we reach the impact change. And with that, Lasha also mentioned the Africa Circular Economy Alliance. Just to point out, it's hosted at the African Development Bank, supported by Dalberg as the consultant. And so within the Africa Circular Economy Alliance, which is a good space or a good platform because it's country-driven. And so we are bringing the facility and the alliance together to have that momentum. And within that alliance, we also have the Circular Economy Network, which is a network of practitioners. So we have government, we have practitioners, and we have the financiers. So we think we have a good winning combination in terms of platform for dialogue. What are the priority areas? How do we engage? So that's the conversation we're beginning with. Thank you. And it's good that we are setting it out as we set off on the decade of action as it is 2020. Thank you so much for stopping.
Thanks so much, Davina, for setting the scene. And I'd definitely like to hear more as we proceed about what some of the emergent priority areas might be so far. We're going to turn to Jonas Bistrom from the European Investment Bank to share a reflection on financing mechanisms that he's seen which can support circular economy initiatives.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this session, so thanks to ICLE and others for the invitation. I'm representing the European Investment Bank, and this is a bank located with headquarters in Luxembourg in Central Europe, and we are the EU's lending arm. And we have a mandate to support projects that implements EU policy. And from that point of view, the circular economy has been very high on our agenda since 2015, when the first circular economy package was presented by the EU Commission. And they have since then, also in the new Commission, worked really hard to promote the transition to a more circular economy in the EU. And that is what we have done as well. And I will try to respond to the questions posed to me, which was, which are the finance instruments or effective financing mechanisms we have seen to support the circular economy. And we have in the last 5 years financed, I think, over 100 projects in 7 different sectors, around 2.5 billion in total. And we have seen many different kind of projects, ranging from the very young, doing research development, startups, scale-ups, growth companies, to the more mature companies, which is maybe where the EIB is most at home, because we usually do large investment loans, which I come back to later. We can see then that the cash flow and the risk assessment of the risk profile of these companies, they vary quite a lot, from pre-revenue, pre-profit to profit, and then profit with low risk. And for that reason, there is a need for many different types of financing mechanisms to cover all the needs in this circular transition. And it ranges from equity investments, the early type of investments where venture capital, private equity, business angels, maybe even earlier, are taking a bet on that some good research development, a good startup actually will succeed and will become a more mature company that later can attract loan or debt financing based on a bit of a history, a bit of a balance sheet, etc. In between, and for the early stages, there's often a need, even beyond the equity, to seek grant financing, but you really need to get early stage thoughts, ideas up to something where equity investors could believe in the idea or be willing to take the risk. But what we've also seen and think is quite important beyond these more direct types of investment and financing is guarantees of different forms. Because when the EU or a government or maybe even a local government can put in place a guarantee facility, that would enable investors or banks to take the kind of risk that they're not really willing or able to do otherwise. So it's quite an effective way that is not committing money as it's done in grants to get good ideas, young companies, startups off the ground. And we're looking a bit at what are the different kind of circular economy projects from EIB side. In the early stages, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we discussed a lot, how do we define the circular economy? And we have eventually come to a kind of a categorization with 3 main categories: circular design and production models, with design of new materials, products, production processes, etc., that enable or promote a more circular economy. Then we have the circular use models, where there are efforts done to repair, refurbish, repurpose, promote reuse of end-of-life products or assets, but also the product as a service models and various types of sharing leasing models. And then we have the more traditional value recovery models, like we heard from previous speakers, or maybe more the focus in the African context now, recovery of waste, of bio resources of different kinds, and closing loops. And when looking at these 3 different types of circular product categories, you could maybe say that the first one, the circular design production, often are the larger companies, more mature companies. They can often access debt or loan financing, while the circular use models, the circular recovery models may be having either new innovative business models or for value recovery, new innovative technologies that would require, at least initially, some more equity-like financing, possibly supported initially by grants or by guarantees. So in summary, there are many different ways to finance, and there is really a need to look at the type of product, the type of company, and then try to find the right provider of finance. And since this is quite a bit of a challenge, we have in the EIB, together with an advisory hub, prepared something called the Circular City Funding Guide, from which this illustration is taken, and it provides quite a lot of information on both different kind of funding sources and financing types for the fund seekers, but also information for fund providers that may be interested in setting up a dedicated facility for the circular economy. And then it has general information about the circular city context, which we believe is quite important. From the EIB point of view, as I said, we have done quite a bit of circular economy lending, ranging from the larger kind of investment loans to large corporate companies that are doing circular projects or investments, or linear companies that would like to turn more circular. But we also have ability to finance, for example, cities that have large maybe investment programs where there are opportunities in such investment programs to identify the circular components, maybe the climate components, and then do thematic investments. And then we can lend through other banks, intermediary banks, and we have in Africa, for example, an operation with the Bank of Africa Group, and through their members we can reach out then to the smaller projects, the smaller promoters, which are difficult for the EIB based in Luxembourg to manage. And when I say based in Luxembourg, that is where we are sitting, I think 3,200 in the headquarters. But in Africa, we have quite a few offices with EIB representatives, I think 7 or 8 offices, which you will find on our website. So we are also having a local presence. But then in addition to these type of instruments, we also have thematic impact finance that enables us to take a bit more risk and really support the pre-revenue commercial demonstration type of projects. Where possible, we try to support the blending of our investments, our loans or financing with grants of different kinds, not seldom from the EU. And we recognize the need for promoters to maybe get support in preparing the projects, in improving the bankability, and that we do through advisory programs of different kinds. We have the hub, we have the Urbis focusing on urban areas, we have Innofin Advisory for innovative projects, and Jaspers for EU-supported projects. One particular program quite relevant in this context is what we refer to as COPIP, the Clean Ocean Project Identification and Preparation Program, which is a program that is focusing on identifying in particular solid waste projects, but also stormwater and wastewater projects in sub-Saharan Africa that have a clear and tangible impact on reducing the pollution of oceans and of seas with plastics that is not collected, not properly handled in the waste management system. So it's a way to trying to look for circular solutions for ocean plastic pollution. And I will give a link to this and to the other things I mentioned later on, so you can follow up. We have also quite a lot of guidance material that you will find on a dedicated circular economy page. We have this guide that I referred to. We have an access to finance study prepared by Innovation Finance Advisory. We have this Circular City Funding Guide, which is a website I referred to before. And we have a guide for how cities can take the steps from being linear, resource consuming, polluting, to becoming more circular, and therefore more generative, restorative, resilient, and much more livable than the linear cities. That is what I wanted to say. And for more information, we have this website, we have the Circular City Funding Guide address, we have a dedicated email address you can reach us on. And for this COPIP project, you can use this COPIP email address. So with this, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonas. I think that's articulated really nicely, the different types of funding approaches, and their connection to the different principles. And so what we've also heard from our previous inputs is there's a lot of focus on waste or integrated waste management as an entry point for circular economy. And that seems to be well connected to startup initiatives and early sort of interventions. But as we want to mainstream circular economy into our cities and countries, we want to start shifting more to the design thinking, which, as you've shown, seems to require more robust business models. How do we scale up, grow into mature businesses? So that would be a nice exploration for our discussion going further. I'd like to invite a reflection now from Ruka Sanusi on what the key elements to support circular economy business growth can be.
Okay, thank you very much. So really in thinking about the key elements that support circular economy business growth and success, I think I should just give a little bit of background to disclose my biases, because the Ghana Climate Innovation Center is a national business incubator that works at the nexus of climate change, climate action, private enterprise, economic development, and also ecological prosperity. So we recognize that the private sector is not only the engine of growth, but also one of the key sectors that we can use to have this transition to a low carbon economy. So we work with small and growing businesses who have climate innovation. And we also are starting to work with growing businesses that actually want to green aspects of their operations. So we provide them with a whole range of business advisory and technical, as well as financial support. In Gracia's submission, many of the, should I say, startups that she described in the sectors that they have been operational, we have a whole range of entrepreneurs that work in these sectors as well, whether that's waste management, water management, climate smart agriculture, etc. But I think that the previous speaker actually, set the tone for, I think, what I'm about to say, because from R&D to even scale up, I think, enterprises are ranked as a very high risk. And I think, in my submission, I'm going to be speaking to that. So I want to look at the elements that support circular economy business growth and success from two levels. The first level is at the level of the enterprise and the entrepreneur. And the second level is at the level of the ecosystem that the entrepreneur and the enterprise operates in. At the first level, one of the first things I think we know is that no matter how wonderful the business idea, no matter how novel your circular economy business innovation is, an idea is, you have to have a viable business model. You have to have a product and a service that consumers want and consumers need, a product or a service that can scale. And that has implications for the agility of your innovation and the agility also of your team members and those that are working around maybe the technical aspects of that innovation, so that you can pivot. And we've also seen that, given it again what the EIB was saying about risk assessment levels, you have to be a determined and tenacious entrepreneur and enterprise, so that you can move beyond the excitement and the euphoria of having a novel business idea, because the idea, no matter how great, it needs structure to thrive. So your enterprise must be structured. And what does that structure look like? I mean, that entails elements such as a horizon planning or strategy. What do you want to achieve in thinking about scaling your business? What are the key outputs and outcomes that you must have in the short term, the medium term, and the long term? Without doing that kind of deep thinking, the impact that you want to have with your circular economy idea, you may not have it. And that's a pity, because we know that there is this global climate emergency, and we need, the whole idea is that whatever innovation, the innovation that you have, the world needs it. So we need it to scale. So we need you to think deeply about what you're doing. And that's what's going to get the likes of the EIB potentially interested in you. So horizon planning is key. And then you really, really have to know and to understand your clients, right? And more especially, not just all your clients, but your preferred clientele. Who are those clients that really your innovation speaks to, right? And this is probably only about 20% of your entire clients. So know your preferred clientele. Understand their demographics, understand the issues about gender, issues about spending power, issues about, where they work, where they play, where they go, the things that are important to them, because these are the outlets for your branding, for your marketing, for your communications. So it's really important to understand your clients. And in talking about structure as well, even in terms of your team members and your leadership. Again, VCs, the likes of banks, and they're interested in the people behind an idea, right? So your staff are your ambassadors, right? And they must buy into what you do. It's important to have mission aligned and values aligned team members. These things do affect your ability to scale. So the people that you have on your team, this is not the time to recruit somebody that has been unemployed for 2 years and you really want to help them. As nice as that would be, you've got to have people who can deliver. And I appreciate that as a startup or a scale up, you probably can't afford to have the most experienced people. But have people that can grow with you, that the foundational knowledge is there. And you yourself have to be a leader. You need to bring people along. So having that business idea, is really not enough. You've got to lead with your thought. You've got to bring people along, and that has implications for the kind of person that you yourself are. And in structuring your business also for scale up, think about your third-party suppliers. And for me here, the key thing is, will they bring in efficiency to your operations? How will they bring in efficiency? And they must bring in efficiency. And they must also be values aligned. It's so important with people to work with people who will deliver to your timelines, to people who will not compromise on, if you're a circular economy and business, you don't want people polluting the ethics of your business. So, really thinking deeply about your third-party suppliers is key. And of course, financing. I can't stress this enough. It takes financing to scale. You don't necessarily need to go to the high street banks to get financing, because their financing is much more short term. You want to think about long-term financing, whether that is from VCs, or whether that is from angel investors, or even organizations like ourselves who can give you significant grant financing. But we have to see some of these foundational things that I'm talking about in your business. These are the things that are the key elements for business growth and success. The second level that I would like to touch on is about the wider ecosystem. You see, enterprises do not exist in a silo. They're part of an ecosystem. So, as a circular economy business, regulations affect you, right? Government policies, affect you. What your competitors are doing either nationally or in the other countries, you know, that are your neighbors also matters, right? So I always advocate for our entrepreneurs that, you know, you've got to be a thought leader. You've got to go out there and advocate for what it is that you're doing. You know, and particularly on the continent, people just, you know, keep thinking, well, you know, we're not a great emitter. We don't really have to, you know, think about it. You know, think about climate change and climate action now. It's our time. It's our turn to industrialize. That is really, you know, that's an obscene way of thinking as far as I'm concerned. And for every entrepreneur that's working in this sector, you know, you've got to be an advocate for your sector. You've got to be a thought leader. You've got to go out there advocating and recognizes that you may have to change, you know, government policy, right? Or you may have to, you know, be part of a group of people that changes government policies and regulations. And that's why, you know, a network such as yours is so important, because, you know, you're working as part of a group, right? It's important to, you know, our incubator is a national incubator. We also do a lot of policy and advocacy in the government sector. So it's important to think about, you know, how you can contribute to the debate, how you can contribute to the advocacy through various associations, through various networks, through various articles, through various conferences. So there are two levels that I think will contribute. Those are the two levels I think will contribute to your business growth and your success. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruka. No, I think that's really insightful. And you know, to add to our conversation, I'm building a list of future conversations. This question: do businesses consider themselves as part of the circular economy paradigm or movement? Is that something powerful, or are they more interested in their specific niche? You know, and so when we're talking about thought leadership in businesses, is that a calling card that they're keen to jump on board with? We'll shift to hear from Himkar Singh, CEO of the Compost Kitchen, and his experience running a circular business.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, LoCS4Africa and ASIN for this amazing invite to this distinguished panel. I'd like to give you an insight into how I started the business without funding, so we can see how a business normally starts, so that we can see how financing could slot into that normal pathway. Our journey started in 2017 when South Africa was having quite a bad drought. I decided to leave the country to study a master's degree in water management to try and figure out a solution to South Africa's water problems. And I lived in Germany for 5 months, then Vietnam for 5 months, and then Jordan for 5 months, all trying to understand different aspects of water to try and find the solution. And the solution that I realized that we need to do is to repair our soil. The soil is the first point of contact of a raindrop, and everything that happens downstream is determined by that moment. But soil in South Africa is degraded, and that's mainly defined by its low organic matter. So what we need to be doing is putting organic matter back into the soil, because organic matter makes the soil act like a sponge. So I started a business with the eventual vision of making South Africa an organic farming state, because it turns out that to do organic farming, you just need to have good soil, and good soil means high organic matter. So if we can make South Africa an organic farming state, we automatically fix the water problem. So we've got a business that is along that pathway, and the way it works at the moment is customers put their food waste out on the curbside every week, and we come and collect it weekly. And we feed it to earthworms, which produce a really rich compost known as vermicompost. And then we give that vermicompost back to customers at the end of the month so that they can grow food again in their gardens. And for that, customers pay 11 euros per month. And currently we have 100 customers signed up for that service. We started it using a lean methodology. So it started off first by meeting experts, policymakers, who were very open to discussing where would we fit in terms of the context of waste or organic waste. And then we also made an e-bike made from, with a trailer made from recycled wood, and an African blender to shred the waste before we feed it to the earthworms, as well as a vermicomposting system to make the vermicompost. And that was all made using materials that would otherwise have been wasted. So it didn't cost much at all. And this is a snapshot of our finances. We started in April 2019, and this is just finances over the last year. It shows that, you know, when you start, it's small. The revenue is small because you're just getting started, and we didn't have any funding, so it just grew naturally in an organic rate. But then, as revenue increased, especially during Corona time, we are having quite a good growth, and we're seeing quite a high sign-up rate as well as sales of other products. And what we wanted to do is demonstrate that we have the competence to run a business like this before we approach anyone for funding. So we've got everything ready now, really, and we will start accessing financing soon. But if government would like to support circular businesses more, what we would really benefit from is more market research, because when we try to access funding, institutions always want to know what is the market size, what is our market share. But in this new industry, it's really difficult to determine those. So we just need more research to back those claims up. And then we also would appreciate small grants. So I don't need €1 million, but I just need a small amount so that I can unlock, develop a small technology that can unlock the next phase of the business. And those grants can be, just small amounts that are chunk based. So as you progress, you can release them, and also be easy to access. It doesn't take too many months to try and get it. And then we really appreciated the government here being open to meeting, and we hope that that continues in the future. For our future, or the near future, we are inventing a model called Vermi Buyback, where we will give customers a worm box to make vermicompost at home from their waste, and then we will buy back the vermicompost from them and then sell it to smallholder farmers for less than the price of fertilizer. That way, households can earn income from their waste at home. Smallholder farmers can lower their input costs, and we can obtain a large quantity of compost without having a massive facility. But this model is completely new, so it's difficult to motivate for financing when there's very little evidence that it would work. But luckily, we've got everything else prepared. We've demonstrated our integrity, energy, and intelligence, which is Warren Buffett's investment criteria. But in summary, circular business, it starts off one way, and it keeps evolving as it goes. So financing also needs to recognize that. And so I look forward to more questions a bit later.
Thanks so much, Imka. And I think, in a way, you've given a nudge to the question I posed sort of in the last point, which is what might characterize a circular business versus maybe another niche business. And I think the quote of soil is the first contact of a raindrop and affects everything downstream, to me summarizes that. You're applying a systems approach in a really nice way. And it has been a theme in many of the discussions for the Local Climate Solutions Congress, that mobilizing large funds, not to say it's easy, but is often more forthcoming than the small grants. And I think that's a theme which would be worth exploring. Finally, I'd like to hand over to our final speaker for inputs, but also to begin us on reflecting on what we're hearing. So to turn to our Honourable Mayor, Mhlongo from the city of Mhlathuze, to reflect on what's been heard thus far, but also to reflect on what you think the key role for local government can be in supporting business and supporting a sustainable transition.
Thank you very much, Paul. I hope that I'm audible enough. And thank you very much to all the panelists and for the insightful conversations that we've had. And my role here is to look at this from a government perspective and what role that in particular local government can play to help the circular economy to thrive. We, as government in general, our role is always to try and make sure that we create an environment wherein investments in the economy are able to thrive. And you do that by creating what we call policy certainty. And so that when there is policy certainty, investors are then able to say, we know what we are getting into and what we are going to get, so that anyone who has an idea is able to say, my idea will be protected by this government, and I'm getting into a partnership that is trustworthy and that will be both beneficial to me as an entrepreneur, but also the people as a whole, because governments are not in it for themselves, but they are there to act as equalizers. We all know that communities in the world over are suffering from high levels of inequality, with most wealth concentrated in the hands of the few. And we believe that the conversations we're having around the circular economy are very important, particularly as to play as an equalizer in our unequal society, because new innovative ideas are beginning to come up, and they are very important, in particular, in our case, for small enterprises that are just startups that are getting into these spaces and are competing with big corporates, which have been there for a very long time. Now, I think that is very important, and I particularly like what the last panelist, Himka, spoke about when he spoke about government being accessible and open to meetings, because that means that in our operations as government, we need to reduce bureaucracy and make sure that we attend to businesses, because I mean, there's an issue here about cost, the cost of doing business with government. We waste a lot of time on a number of meetings and so on. So this is very important, particularly because it means the difference between the survival of an idea and the death of the idea. It is very likely that someone with a big budget can come and steal the very same idea, and therefore defeats the purpose, where we think that local economies can in fact thrive on the basis of the circular economy. So we see the role of government as brokering and as partnering and also as actors in our own right. And so that we are able to act also as an advocacy for the circular economy. We from a perspective of the city of Mhlathuze, we are also working on a number of projects which we believe that are going to be game changers within the city. We are part of the city of Mhlathuze is part of 5 local municipalities in the country that were selected by the National Department of Environmental Affairs, a diversion from landfill initiative funded by the GIZ, commissioned in 2016. And the project has since yielded the pre-feasibility report looking at various waste initiatives to reduce the volume of waste to the district landfill. And based on the outcome of the pre-feasibility study, which revealed high volumes of organic waste, it was deemed most viable for the city to pursue a composting initiative. We are partnering with the Development Bank of Southern Africa in this initiative, and the project is estimated somewhere around 33.5 million rands, which if you convert it is somewhere, I'm not very good with that kind of thing. But also the second project, which we think is also important and it reflects, by the way, that first project is going to be a PPP, which is a public-private partnership. Now the second one is the which we are partnering with civil society and on social compacts, is the Africa Green Glass. And this is a glass recycling facility based in one of our biggest townships in Escalini. And the company comprises of women, youth. Ms. Mangele Chirwa works closely with waste pickers. The glass is sorted, crushed, and transported to Consol Glass in Gauteng. And they are supported also by the Department of Economic Development and the Office of the Premier, which is a very good project, particularly for us. The last one is Utando, which amongst many, which I want to highlight, is Utando Solutions, which was also founded by Ms. Nokubonga Mnyango. Her company operates at the Municipal Material Recovery Site in Alton. Which means, therefore, we have forged a long-standing partnership with her, and they supply Coca-Cola, Petco, and Sapi with recycled bottles. So these are initiatives that we can do as local government, partnering with the people, partnering with our social partners to ensure that we are part, not just as consumers now, we are also recycling, we are also making sure that we are resilient as cities. We are also looking at now, as part of ICLE, they are assisting us to look at the built environment. Many of our buildings are now being supported through ICLE to be more resilient and to operate in that environment. So we are seeing a more impactful role played by government, both as a partner, but also as an advocacy for local communities in this environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Mayor. I think that's a great insight of those dual roles as a broker, but also an actor in your own right. And I think as we delve in, it would be great to reflect on what local government, who we often say are the middle stage between the community and government, what support local government can need in driving circularity forward. So I'd like to return to our speakers with a few sort of provocations picked up through our conversation. And perhaps to start with Davina, about what you sort of referred to as this large tapestry of innovation. And maybe to comment on 2 points, my perception is that circular economy at the moment is still quite disparate between lots of different entities, and mostly led by private sector. So maybe if you can comment if that's how you understand it as well, or if you think that the programmatic approaches are coming to the fore. But the question then is, well, how do we tie together the many different efforts around circularity into a bit more of a movement?
Right, thanks. Indeed, I think we share the same perspective on that in terms of circular economy. At the moment, in the stories we've had or the businesses that we've seen are largely small size, private run innovations and interventions. And just like the different speakers have articulated very well, I liked the CEO's comment, real example of how the business runs. And that's the life of most private sector on the continent. That's the reality of it. And I think we need, as development banks, to get to that level. Unfortunately, the structure of multinational development banks is to drive development from the government perspective and largely from the big private sector perspective. But we also realize, and I like the mayor's note on the equalizers, that we need to drive the inclusive base, that much as we might want to drive GDP growth, being on the large numbers of big corporates and big agriculture and big mining, there's a whole lot of opportunity on the base. And trying to tap into Mr. Singh's innovations and the various ones, then we create that chain. And so we are starting to create that business model. It's not easy because that's not our traditional way of disbursing funding. So what we've normally done is to create a credit line through intermediaries. And so in most times, that's a long journey because you're talking to many, the chain has many stops. And so there is what we give as instructions to the intermediary, where the intermediary has to speak to that. And for a business, like Singh says, I'm not looking for $1 million. I'm just looking for money to do my market research. And so until you can tap into money at the source, and get me right, we still do equity, we still do grants. But our equity is mostly to that big corporate that is doing large-scale agriculture. It's that we know how to do. And so we are trying to begin this conversation with SMEs. How do we create an investment mechanism for SMEs? So we're trying to have that conversation with institutions that have done that. I mentioned the Nordic Development Bank, which is a donor into the facility that has learned how to do that mechanism. And we're listening to that conversation. And so we're trying to listen to how do you help the CEO here do his market research and get to the level where you have a reimbursable grant in that kind of a conversation. As the African Development Bank, we're very conscious that we shouldn't crowd out national development banks and commercial banks because that is their business. But I think there is some leverage level that we can tap into and bring, at least even bring our convening role onto this conversation. And this platform is good enough to get that conversation to the right people. Or because I think it starts with how do we de-risk this and what instruments are there to de-risk this kind of businesses. And so if we can't have the platform that speaks about de-risking these innovations in a manner that is consistent, because most times it is short-term and then it moves on. Today we are talking circular economy, tomorrow there will be another trend that takes on our attention. So the consistency is very key. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, and I'd like to pick up on something you picked up on, as well as Mayor Mhlongo, on inequality as a key focus point. If we're going to undertake any interventions for sustainability, if we're going to pursue a circular economy agenda in African countries and African cities, you cannot ignore inequality. And in fact, there's a lot of focus on, well, how do we embed in some of our early discussions with ASEN and with circular economy practitioners, how do you embed social imperatives in the circular economy framework? So I'd like to ask Rasha and Ruka to reflect. you're both working in climate spaces. And so perhaps, Gracia, if you can reflect on the linking of circular economy businesses with climate outcomes, and climate being an incredibly present emergency that we're in, but also somewhat intangible for the everyday. And similarly, Ruka, if you can reflect on embedding some of our equity goals in circular economy, and what we're seeing there. And both of these is very structural issues to overcome. And what is the role of business, or what have you seen emerging? Perhaps, Gracia, if you can start us off.
Thanks, Paul. So just recapping on what you've suggested, I speak on is basically linking circular economy with climate outcomes and what we've seen, particularly at SMME levels or within the private sector. I think as the Carbon Trust, having worked with a number of private companies, particularly I think the larger ones, again, I stand to be corrected. My understanding is that at the moment, the level of awareness around, one, it is the right thing to do, right? I mean, depending on where you find yourself in, the level of awareness around the climate emergency, the impact that it will have, not only on our planet, but actually on the bottom line. And many companies particularly the larger ones, are starting to look at it from a risk perspective and understanding how future climate change impacts are going to affect their day-to-day business, and how do they essentially prepare for it. So there's a lot of work that's currently being done around working with corporates, depending on the resources that they have and the goals they've set for themselves around net zero, to essentially help them transition and help them identify what interventions would be required, and what would be even more important, the financial impact of those interventions. Again, my experience working particularly at SMME level, I do come from an incubation background, has been that to have the conversation around sort of climate and low carbon benefits, it comes down to how does that affect my bottom line. And oftentimes I think when it comes to having the conversation with the private sector, being able to quantify, be it the net benefit, whether it's from a reputational perspective or on their bottom line, is usually what keeps people in the room. So I was involved earlier in the industrial symbiosis conversation in South Africa when we were setting up the program. And the earlier conversations really were around being able to diverse the amount of waste, being able to save carbon emissions, etc. And the traction was, let me say, limited until we were able to quantify that for the particular company. So when the match happened based on unutilized resources between the guys that had the resource and the guys that could use the resource, the conversation came down to how will that affect that bottom line. When we're looking at small companies, most of the times they are completely overworked. And so taking someone from their core business and what they know how to do really well and encouraging them to adopt something that will eventually impact on their bottom line, but that requires a slight change to their day-to-day business, was a conversation that we needed to have. And I come down to, I think, the point that Ruka mentioned and also Davina suggested. Funding is a challenge, but it's not the only challenge. And I think Imka mentioning the fact that it needed resources for market research is a typical example of that. As the Carbon Trust, we've been involved, not here in Africa, but in the UK, we've supported a number of business support development programs and accelerator, particularly for startups in circular economy. And a lot of the support that's currently being given is providing market research, so the evidence that the company needs to be able to motivate in front of funders and donors that this is in fact a market opportunity, and I intend to capture X percentage of this market opportunity. This would be the benefits, and quantify, putting that in a language that the financing institution understand. That's a lot of the work that we've done. So providing market research, helping them build a valid business model, helping them understand where their revenue is coming from, helping them understand whether their product is priced right, helping them understand whether the client that they originally had in mind is actually the client that will end up being willing to pay for the product at the right price. And that's a lot of the work that's currently, I think, underestimated when it comes to scaling up innovations from the technology that's required or that's applicable for the African context, to having an SMME that's employing 5 people, to having a scaled up business that's generating economic and environmental prosperity for the continent. So that's, for me, if I had to have final words, the challenge that I'd leave us with is the fact that this has been done. The conversation around adequate financing instrument, the conversation around being able to quantify the environmental benefits for the private sector is currently being done. So if we look at the energy access sector for mini grids are not financially viable. And a lot of the finding instruments that are being put together, understanding that we're working with very small projects, are looking at funding the viability gap. And there's a number of result-based financing instruments that are being, let me say, designed, discussed with the private sector to try and understand what is that viability gap and what mechanism we could use to get that to the developer as fast as we can. So this is a conversation that we can also have in the circular economy, obviously depending on the region and depending on the sector. I think that it would be, my caution would just be that if you're looking at water, if you're looking at the agricultural sector, if you're looking at the waste sector, although there are commonalities, these sectors, depending on whether in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in East Africa, are quite different. And it's important to bring that into our conversation. Yeah.
Thanks, Marsha. I think your note about engaging with context is really important, as well as then this gap between perhaps our plethora of small organizations who can't necessarily afford what Ruka might refer to as the thought leadership in pushing this forward versus the larger organizations who can. And thanks again for the reference back to market research to support business decisions. Ruka, on the question of social equity and in response, I think, to Gracia.
Okay. I want to be a little bit provocative, if I may, in answering this question about embedding social imperatives into circular economy and meeting our equity goals within the through circular economy. And going back to the 2 levels that I spoke about, the enterprise level and then the wider ecosystem level. And the reason why I said I wonder whether I can be provocative is because I think, speaking for the small and growing businesses, we don't want to burden them more than they're already burdened, right? So there's so many things that they have to think about. Don't forget that many of these, I don't know what the case with Himcare is, many of the people, the entrepreneurs that come into climate action, they're probably doing something completely different before they started their enterprises. So they're grappling with what it is, and to actually run a bit, to start operating, grow a business, using best practice and intentionally. Yes, they have to employ people, and yes, I would like them, being a woman entrepreneurs advocate, I would like them to recruit women in their teams. I like them to think about maybe additional social imperatives. But we've got to recognize that well, for my own constituents, they are small and growing businesses, and I don't know whether we can burden them with some of those social social imperatives. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't think about it. By virtue of the fact that they're working in that whole circular economy, they're thinking about other things that businesses other businesses don't think about in any case. So there is an advantage there, and I think it is the likes of us, okay, that also have a responsibility to speak about the social the social imperatives of going green, the social imperatives of having transitioning to a low carbon economy, so that the small and growing businesses can get the visibility that they need, the values visibility. But if I get the question correctly, I don't want, I know how difficult it is to operate in the SME sector, in terms of, there's so many inequalities that they have to deal with, inequalities of government policy. They don't have the voice of the agency of big business, right? And then if we then have to burden them with thinking about, with these additional extras, it can just also be very, very, frustrating. But I do think what we're also finding, in addition to organizations like ours, we are finding now that a lot of corporations, international banks, big multinational corporations, are actually starting business incubators, that work around issues of climate action, the circular economy. And the reason why that is important is that they can give voice. They can put their money where their mouth is. They can allow the small and growing businesses to actually, do the advocacy through the strength, of their businesses and their business models. So I said I wanted to be a little bit provocative. I'm not saying that enterprises shouldn't think about, equity goals. They should, but an enterprise exists for commercial purposes, because at least this is what the banks tell us when we go and look for money, and and they shouldn't be too derailed from that, particularly if they're still on that growth path and that on that trajectory. I hope all of that makes sense.
Thanks so much. No, certainly a provocation. Get the business running, primary step. Jonas, sorry, I realize your video is off, but feel free, please, to share your video. And I wonder if you can share your reflection on what's been said, but perhaps also this reflection perhaps on what we might call social innovation. And are you seeing any cases of that in businesses you're engaging with at EIB?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I can see my video is frozen for some reason. I don't know really why, but I think this is a very, very interesting discussion. And I think starting a bit from the upper side, there was interesting points made by the Mayor Mlongo and by other speakers as well as to the government's role in promoting the circular economy. You said also beyond maybe the basics of trying to close some material loops, etc. And I think there is a lot the governments can do, both on national level and local level, with regard to really looking at establishing a joint and shared vision in a city, in the country, as to what is the potential to go from linear businesses, linear way of thinking, to a more circular, looking at which are the sectors, which are the kind of projects that in the particular context in a city, in a country, could or should be explored. And by doing so, and by ensuring that such vision making, such strategy or roadmap making is done with all relevant stakeholders, you are in the process building a collaborative culture that would really promote this cooperation that is needed to go from linear to circular, but also from the basic circular to the more fringe type of new business models going beyond just recycling materials. And that is, I think, really important. And also the government on particularly local level, they have the opportunity to embed circular principles in urban planning, in their provision of services, of assets, but also through public procurement. And I think in the EU, there are figures saying that around 15%, 16% of the EU GDP is public procurement. So just by recognizing the potential to promote, support circular initiatives, businesses, by reflecting, including circular criteria in the public procurement, you have a very good lever to push this. Then as financiers, I think that EIB and African Development Banks and other similar banks, we are public banks. We are not interested just in getting our money back. We are interested in making a difference, adding value, being additional, promoting, catalyzing, etc., through what we do. And EIB has, as I said, circular economy very high on the agenda, but we're also the climate bank for the EU and for the rest of the world. And we have a 50% lending target for climate action, for environmental sustainability. And therefore, we really look for and are very happy to support the projects that have a clear and tangible climate impact. But we also look for other impacts, such as social impacts. We report on every project on the job creation. We are really interested in supporting projects where there is a tangible job creation impact, not least in this pandemic situation, where there are need to build back, there are need to ideally then build back greener, more circular, but also ensure that the circular developments are, as have been said, just and inclusive. And I think then what Himkar Singh talked about in South Africa, it's a very interesting project. We have in our house in the garage, vermicompost bins. I can really very well relate to what you're trying to do. And I think the idea of trying to involve the actual waste generators and get them to do this work for you, give them a chance and an incentive to separate the waste, earn some money for you to have a feedstock and build your business around that is interesting, not only from, as you said, addressing the water issue in South Africa, but also from climate point of view. I mean, getting the food waste out of the landfills or the dump sites has a fantastic carbon footprint reduction, negative carbon footprint, in addition to then not really maybe job creation, but at least some income generation potential. So trying to look at all these aspects, also seeing how the governments on national, local level can promote is a lot of opportunities and a lot that could be done beyond what is done already.
Thanks, Jonas. I'd like to ask for 2 minutes from Himkar and 2 minutes from Mayor before we do a roundtable, just closing reflection for the session. On Himkar, there's a question in the Q&A on more logistics. Why did your revenue grow during lockdown? So if you could reflect on that. But also a question, are you doing your own market research? And what do you perceive your role to be as offering leadership and experience to other businesses?
Yes, to help answer the question from the chat, I'll use a visual aid, and I'm conscious of time. So pre-COVID, we were having about 3 to 4 customers signing up per month. And in April 2020 is when lockdown level 5 happened in South Africa, which we saw no sign-ups because it was a shock to everyone, and no one was focusing on recycling. But as people settled into lockdown, they started spending more time with their waste and realizing how much they produce and wanting to do something about it. Additionally, during May time and April time, the Black Lives Matter and gender abuse problems were circulating the world quite intensely. So it was a really negative time. But our business is very positive. There's a lot of feel good about it. So we saw a lot of customers coming to us to try and feel better, about life, and which we do give them. So post-COVID, post level 5, we've seen significantly higher growth in customers signing up than pre. And with those customers signing up, they also buy additional products from us, like compost or products for their garden. So that's been the growth related to COVID. And your second question about leadership is, well, we're not trying to lead anyone really. We're just trying to solve problems for the customers. So our business, although it's circular, it wasn't intended to be a circular business. The fact that we give compost back to customers was not a design. It was the fact that there was a problem in the recycling industry and that customers didn't trust the recycling industry. So by giving compost back to customers, we prove that it's been recycled, and that way we solve a problem for them. So we're always focusing on enhancing the experience of customers, and that is naturally just spreading this vision and the energy about it to others. But we don't try to actively convince others to try and do this, because everything's just natural, you know. And yes.
Thanks, Himka. I'd like to turn to Mayor Mhlongo just on a reflection on what you've heard so far as well, but also what local government may need as an actor in the circular economy.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think just to start with your first question, obviously in South Africa, there are a lot of conversations around professionalization of local government. And I think one of your panelists spoke about the right quality of people in the right jobs. And you would need definitely at local government level and at national level to find the right skills to be able to move faster and at the right pace to ensure that we are not left behind. Africa has this problem that new innovations come in, we react 3-5 years later when everyone else has moved far ahead. And it's important that also local government works actively to develop more research capabilities in order to understand what the market value is and where opportunities for each region or each local government do lie, because each area will have different kinds of opportunities. So I think it's important, the aspect about local research. But the last point I want to speak about, I'm a firm believer in the base influencing what in theory we call the superstructure, so that it is not a top-down approach, but it is from the bottom going up, so that people at a grassroots level are the first beneficiaries of change. And this represents what is right up their door, because everything starts from the family and starts from the local companies and starts from, so that we don't just consume, but we are now able to be part of the circular economy. So I believe local governments should find their right space and to make sure that they influence the development of the circular economy from the bottom going up. But the superstructure, as it were, is important from a policy perspective and direction at a national level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like, on behalf of our team at the Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress, to extend a huge thank you to all of our panelists. As usual, this conversation would benefit from another hour, but we have a hard stop at 12. So I'd just like, I offered 30 seconds for a reflection each, but can we maybe do a 15-second reflection each in our last 2 minutes on a key point that participants could take forward? So maybe starting with Peter, and we'll go around.
Thank you, Paul. 15 seconds does not allow me very long, but the elements that I came across from the conversations were about funding, commercial aspects, collaboration, equity in the meaning of shares and justice, and the triple bottom line, economic, environment, and social impacts. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Peter. Davina.
Yeah, indeed. I think I'll have two very quick points. One is the coalitions to move action. We've done it globally when we had the ARVs for AIDS. There was a global coalition that pushed that agenda. If we could put circular economy around the World Economic Forum agendas and try to influence asset investors in that area to push that agenda, I think it would move the need on finance. Two is to start to begin to think around just transition issues when the global movement shifts to circular economy, what happens to primary exporters of commodity economies, mostly African? So those are some of the issues that we need to begin to focus on. Thank you.
Thanks, Davina. Jonas.
Yeah, just like to make the point again that from government and from everyone's point of view, there is a need probably to build awareness that circular economy and climate action are mutually reinforcing goals.
Thanks. Ruka?
I would say to my ecopreneurs, my eco warriors, that you need to bolster your circular economy business with a strong business model, and do some amazing, tremendous advocacy as well, and thought leadership. You will get dividends from it.
Thanks. Himka?
Just thank you so much for this conference, and good luck to all the entrepreneurs out there. Get in contact if you want to brainstorm a bit.
Thanks. Gracia?
I think I'll say this wearing both my hats. This is quite an exciting time for the continent. The conversations that we're having today, the institutions that are represented, the FDB, ASEN, the EIB is a strong indication that the circular economy is higher up on the agenda of not only donors, but also policymakers like our honorable mayor here. And I'm excited to be part of the conversation. It's been done before. I think the renewable energy industry was where we are currently a few years ago. And being able to answer the questions around just transition, priority opportunities, what instrument must be put in place, what policy instrument we need to put in place to support both the public sector and the private sector is an exciting journey. And I think I'm excited about what we can achieve as a collective. Circular economy is primarily about collaboration, and I'm excited to be part of the conversation. Yep.
Thanks. And Mayor, the last 20 seconds.
Thank you very much. We believe that the task at hand is very huge, and partnerships are very important, are going to be important going forward in terms of ensuring that we are able to intervene and to make sure that we create an environment that is conducive for economies to thrive. The circular economy is going to need all of us to put our hands on deck, to play awareness, to make sure that there is awareness from a local government level to a national government level, but also to ensure that the people themselves are aware that there is this opportunity for them to make a living and sustain livelihoods, but also to sustain the environment at the same time.
Brilliant. Thank you again so much to our speakers.